The moment I believed I was stepping into pure marital bliss turned into a living hell. A horrifying secret was exposed right in the middle of the aisle, transforming my dream of love into an unbelievable nightmare. Do you want to know the hidden truth behind the groom's smile and what caused a monumental day to descend into disaster? Join me as we unravel this story, and don't forget to follow the channel to discover even deeper secrets. The soft glow of late afternoon sun filtered through the grand ballroom windows, bathing the meticulously set tables and the joyous faces in a warm, ethereal light. Sarah, in her breathtaking ivory gown, felt as if she were floating on air. Every detail, from the delicate lace of her veil to the carefully chosen peonies adorning the reception hall, spoke of months of meticulous planning and a lifetime of dreams. Today, she was marrying Michael, the man who had effortlessly captured her heart, the man whose confident smile and unwavering gaze had promised a future filled with love and unwavering devotion. He stood by her side at the head table, his hand finding hers beneath the crisp linen, a subtle squeeze that sent a familiar flutter through her. She noticed a slight tension in his shoulders, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place in his eyes, but she quickly dismissed it as the natural nerves of a groom on such a momentous day. Everyone felt it, the palpable joy, the shared excitement for the new chapter Sarah and Michael were about to embark on. Laughter mingled with the clinking of champagne glasses, and the air buzzed with well wishes and heartfelt toasts. Just as the band struck up a gentle melody, inviting couples to the dance floor, a ripple of confusion spread through the back of the room. Heads turned, whispers began to circulate, and a sudden sharp silence descended near the grand entrance. Sarah, caught in a moment of bliss, hadn't noticed at first, but Michael's hand tightened almost painfully on hers, and his face moments ago relaxed, paled dramatically. Following his terrified gaze, Sarah saw her. A woman slender and defiant stood just inside the doorway, her presence an immediate disruption to the harmonious scene. She wore a simple yet elegant dress that clung to a subtly rounded belly, a belly that was undeniably prominent. A hush fell over the entire ballroom, the music fading into an awkward silence as all eyes fixed on the unexpected intruder. Then the woman's voice, clear and surprisingly steady, cut through the stillness, carrying effortlessly across the shocked assembly. "Michael?" She began, her eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. "I believe there's something you need to address before you make this marriage official." She took a deliberate step forward, her hand moving to rest protectively over her swollen abdomen. Because she continued, her voice gaining a cutting edge. "I'm pregnant with your child, and I think that gives me a certain right to speak up at your wedding." The words hung in the air, cold and undeniable, shattering the beautiful illusion of Sarah's perfect day into a million irreparable pieces. The sudden, chilling declaration echoed in the stunned silence of the ballroom. Sarah felt a cold dread spread through her, quickly eclipsing the earlier warmth and joy. Her gaze darted from the defiant woman Jessica to Michael, whose face had gone from pale to an ashen gray. He looked trapped like a deer caught in headlights, utterly unable to formulate a response. The guests, a mix of close family and business associates, collectively held their breath, some openly gasping, others staring in disbelief. Michael's usually composed mother, Mrs. Harrison, clutched her husband's arm, her face a mask of horror. Jessica, however, seemed to relish the sudden spotlight. With an air of dramatic purpose, she produced a folded paper from her small clutch bag. "You want proof, Michael?" She challenged, her voice rising slightly, now tinged with a bitter triumph. "Or perhaps you want to deny what's right in front of everyone?" She unfolded the document with a flourish, holding it up for all to see. It was a sonogram image, clearly depicting a tiny developing fetus. "This is our baby Michael. And these," she added, pulling out a handful of printed photos, "are pictures of us, of the life you promised me, the life you've been leading behind this woman's back for months." She began to scatter the photos on a nearby empty table, intimate snapshots of Michael and her in various settings. A cozy dinner, a weekend getaway, a shared laugh that was unmistakably genuine. A few guests gasped louder, some murmuring in disgust. Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Each photo was a fresh stab to her heart, painting a picture of a secret existence she had been completely oblivious to. The man she was about to pledge her life to was a stranger living a double life. She looked at Michael again, desperately searching for an explanation, a denial, anything that would disprove the damning evidence. But he remained silent. His jaw clenched, his eyes, avoiding hers, fixed instead on Jessica with a mixture of anger and resignation. Michael's father, Mr. Harrison, a man known for his formidable business acumen and even temper, finally broke the spell. His voice, usually booming with authority, was a strained whisper. "Michael, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded, pushing himself up from his seat. The question hung heavy in the air, but Michael offered no immediate answer. Jessica, emboldened by his silence, stepped closer to the head table, her gaze now sweeping over Sarah with a pitying yet resolute expression. "He promised me he would leave you, Sarah. He told me he loved me, that I was the one he truly wanted. He said he was just waiting for the right time to tell you." Her words, a cruel dagger to Sarah's already wounded spirit, were delivered with an almost chilling conviction, leaving no room for doubt about the extent of Michael's deception. The perfect day had not merely crumbled. It had been utterly annihilated, leaving only shocked disbelief and the bitter taste of betrayal. The world tilted for Sarah. The vibrant colors of the ballroom blurred into an indistinguishable haze, the joyous chatter of moments ago replaced by a ringing silence in her ears. Her perfect day, the culmination of dreams and meticulous planning, had not merely crumbled, it had detonated. Michael's hand, which had moments ago gently held hers, now felt like a lead weight, and she snatched her fingers away as if burned. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the sonogram, from the damning photographs scattered on the pristine tablecloth, tangible proof of a betrayal so profound it stole the air from her lungs. A hot flush of humiliation rose from her chest to her face, mingling with a chilling wave of disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not to her, not here, not now. She looked at Michael truly, looked at him searching for the man she thought she knew, the man who had whispered sweet nothings and promised forever. But the Michael standing before her was a stranger, his handsome features contorted by shame and trapped helplessness. His inability to deny the claims, his utter silence, was a louder confession than any spoken word could have been. The intimate moments they had shared, the tender gazes, the heartfelt conversations about their future. All of it now felt like a cruel, elaborate lie. Was every tender touch a deception? Every loving word a calculated performance? Her mind reeled, pulling her back to their courtship. She remembered their first meeting, the easy laughter, the undeniable spark. She recalled the countless dates, the shared dreams, the way he had always seemed to anticipate her needs, making her feel cherished and utterly adored. He had been so attentive, so seemingly devoted. He had met her parents, charmed her friends, and seamlessly integrated himself into every aspect of her life. How could she have been so blind? The trust she had so freely given, the love she had so completely invested, felt utterly foolish now, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. A sharp, almost unbearable pain shot through her chest, a physical manifestation of her shattered heart. She felt the weight of every eye in the room, the hushed whispers of pity and scandal. The once beautiful space now felt suffocating, closing in on her. All she wanted was to escape, to run from the prying eyes and the suffocating reality that had just violently intruded upon her life. The world had gone from a kaleidoscope of joy to a monochrome of despair in a matter of excruciating minutes, leaving her adrift in a sea of raw, unadulterated pain. The collective gasp from the guests was quickly replaced by a cacophony of hushed whispers and indignant exclamations. Sarah's mother, Eleanor, a woman of formidable grace, rushed to her daughter's side, her face a mixture of fierce protectiveness and utter devastation. "Sarah, darling, are you all right?" she murmured, her voice trembling as she wrapped an arm around her reeling daughter. Her eyes, however, were blazing as they fixed on Michael, then on Jessica. "What is the meaning of this charade?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the stunned silence that had briefly descended again. "How dare you bring such a spectacle to our family's most joyous occasion?" Michael's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, equally mortified, finally stirred. Mr. Harrison, usually the epitome of composure, looked visibly shaken, his face etched with disbelief and mounting anger. Mrs. Harrison, known for her sharp social graces, seemed to shrink, her perfectly coiffed hair suddenly looking disheveled. Her expensive gown, an unwelcome uniform in this public humiliation. "Michael!" Mr. Harrison's voice boomed, regaining some of its usual authority, though laced with a strained disbelief. "Explain yourself now!" Jessica, however, wasn't done. She stepped forward again, directly addressing the Harrison family. "He promised me he'd tell you. He said he was going to choose us." She stated, her voice trembling slightly now, a hint of desperation seeping into her earlier bravado. "He said he loved me, and that this marriage was just for appearances, for your business connections." Her words were like gasoline on an already raging fire, igniting a fresh wave of outrage from both sides. "Appearances!" Eleanor interjected, her voice rising in disbelief. "My daughter's life is not some business arrangement to be manipulated for your son's deceitful schemes." She turned to Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, her eyes flashing with a righteous fury. "Did you know about this? Were you complicit in this elaborate lie that has just shattered my daughter's heart?" Mr. Harrison, visibly reeling from Jessica's accusations, struggled to maintain his composure. "Absolutely not," he retorted, his face reddening. "We knew nothing of this. Michael, you will explain every last detail of this egregious behavior. This is an utter disgrace, a stain on our family name." Mrs. Harrison, her face pale, could only stand by wringing her hands, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The grand ballroom, moments ago filled with celebration, had transformed into a battleground, the air thick with accusations, betrayal, and the raw, unbridled pain of two families torn apart by one man's devastating deception. The wedding was definitively over, replaced by an agonizing public confrontation that promised long-lasting bitter consequences. The weight of everyone's stares bore down on Michael, suffocating him. He felt the intense, burning glare of Sarah's mother, the disappointment etched deep in his own father's furious eyes, and worst of all, the silent, bewildered anguish in Sarah's tear-filled gaze. He had no escape, no carefully crafted lie that could possibly unravel the undeniable truth Jessica had so brutally laid bare. His carefully constructed facade, the one that allowed him to compartmentalize his life and his loyalties, had just been spectacularly demolished. He finally tore his gaze from Jessica, forcing himself to look at Sarah, but the pain reflected in her eyes was too much to bear. He dropped his head, his shoulders slumping in a defeated posture that spoke volumes. "It's true," he mumbled, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the simmering tension in the room. He cleared his throat, trying to find some semblance of control, but his usual confident demeanor had utterly vanished. Jessica is pregnant with my child." A fresh wave of gasps swept through the ballroom. His father slammed a fist on the table, the sharp sound echoing through the stunned silence. "How could you?" Michael, Mr. Harrison bellowed, his face a mask of betrayal. "How could you do something so reckless, so dishonorable, to Sarah, to her family, to our family?" Michael finally lifted his head, his eyes haunted. He looked from his parents to Sarah, then back to Jessica, a desperate plea for understanding in his gaze, though he knew he deserved none. I don't know," he stammered, running a trembling hand through his hair. It started a while ago. It was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake." He looked at Sarah, a flicker of genuine regret finally showing through his shame. "Sarah, please. You have to believe me, I never meant for it to go this far. I was going to tell you. I couldn't find the right time. I got scared." Jessica scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Scared? You were scared of ruining your perfect life, weren't you, Michael? Scared of disappointing your rich parents? Scared of losing your privileged existence?" Her words were sharp, cutting through his weak defense. "You lied to both of us. You made promises to me, promises of a future together while planning this wedding. You strung me along just as you strung her along." Michael flinched at her words, unable to refute them. He was trapped in the web of his own deceit, the carefully spun threads now tightening around his throat. He looked at Sarah again, his eyes pleading for a shred of understanding, a hint of the forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. But all he saw was a woman utterly broken, her once radiant joy replaced by an abyss of pain and betrayal. His confession, though forced and incomplete, hung heavy in the air, confirming the irreversible damage he had wrought upon everyone present. The harsh glare of the ballroom lights seemed to intensify on Jessica as Michael's inadequate confession hung in the air. She watched him, a mix of vindication and lingering hurt in her eyes. For months, she had lived in the shadows, a secret, awaiting presence. Now, finally, she was visible, undeniable, and it was a bitter, painful victory. Her bold intrusion wasn't just an act of revenge. It was a desperate cry for recognition, for the truth to be acknowledged after so long. Jessica had met Michael almost a year ago at a charity gala, an event she attended as a freelance event planner. He had been charming, charismatic, and undeniably handsome. Their initial conversations were professional, but soon a flirtatious undertone emerged. Jessica, who had always struggled to find stable ground in both her personal and professional life, found herself drawn to his confidence and the seemingly genuine interest he showed in her. He painted a picture of a life that was stifling and empty, trapped by familial expectations and a relationship that lacked passion. He had spoken of a fiancé, Sarah, but always in dismissive terms, as a dutiful obligation rather than a chosen partner. He had pursued her relentlessly, with whispered promises and stolen moments. He made her feel seen, desired, and important in a way no one else ever had. He bought her gifts, took her on lavish trips, and called her almost every night, spinning a compelling narrative of a man desperate to break free and build a real life with someone he truly loved. When she discovered she was pregnant, a terrifying but also hopeful realization, Michael's initial reaction had been one of shock, followed by what seemed like genuine joy. He had insisted they could make it work, that this was the push he needed to finally end things with Sarah. He had reassured her repeatedly that the wedding was a mere formality, a public show for his family's business, and that he would eventually call it off. Jessica had believed him. She desperately wanted to. She knew his world was one of wealth and status far removed from her own, but Michael had convinced her that their love transcended such boundaries. She had waited patiently at first, then, with growing anxiety for him to make good on his promises. But as the wedding date loomed closer and his evasions grew more frequent, a chilling dread had settled in. She saw the social media posts, the news articles, the undeniable reality of the approaching nuptials. Her patience had worn thin, replaced by a raw, desperate fear for her future and the future of her unborn child. She couldn't allow herself to be cast aside to become another one of his secrets. So she had decided, with a heavy heart, but a resolute will, that if he wouldn't reveal the truth, she would. The wedding reception was her last desperate resort, a public unveiling born out of a profound sense of betrayal and a fierce instinct to protect herself and her baby. The aftermath of Jessica's bombshell continued to rip through the Harrisons' carefully constructed world. As the wedding guests dispersed in a chaotic exodus, whispering in horrified tones, the core families remained trapped in the wreckage of Michael's deceit. Mr. Harrison, his face crimson with a mixture of shame and fury, paced the opulent ballroom, now eerily quiet, save for his heavy footsteps. "This is a disaster, Michael, a public scandal. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation, to the family business?" He roared, his voice cracking with emotion. Mrs. Harrison sat crumpled on a gilded chair, tears silently tracking paths down her perfectly made-up face, the image of her son's public humiliation replaying in her mind. Meanwhile, Eleanor, Sarah's mother, held her trembling daughter close. Sarah remained largely silent, her eyes vacant, fixed on some unseen point in the distance, as if trying to process a reality too immense to grasp. Her father, Robert, a man of quiet strength, spoke with a controlled anger that was far more chilling than any shout. "Michael, we need to understand the full extent of this. This isn't just about a mistake. This is about deliberate deception. How long has this been going on?" Under the relentless pressure, Michael began to unravel further. His earlier stammered confession gave way to a grudging piece-by-piece revelation of a far more complex and troubling past. It wasn't just Jessica. He admitted to a pattern of casual affairs throughout his 20s, though he always dismissed them as meaningless flings, never serious. He had always been adept at charming women, at making them feel special, only to move on when the thrill faded or when things became too complicated. His wealthy upbringing had instilled in him a sense of entitlement, a belief that he could navigate situations with minimal consequences, that his family's influence would always smooth over any rough edges. He revealed that the affair with Jessica had indeed started nearly a year ago, flourishing during a period when he felt suffocated by the mounting pressures of his upcoming marriage to Sarah and the expectations of his family's business. Jessica, with her independent spirit and lack of ties to his social circle, had offered an escape of fantasy of freedom from his preordained life. He admitted he had actively lied to her, painting Sarah as an obligation, a necessary evil for his family's corporate ambitions. He had told Jessica he would end the engagement always just around the corner, always waiting for the right time. As the sordid details trickled out, a darker picture of Michael emerged. Not just a man who made a terrible mistake, but a man accustomed to manipulation, to weaving intricate webs of deceit, to maintain his comfort and avoid responsibility. His parents listened in stunned silence, realizing the depth of their son's moral failings. Failings they had perhaps unwittingly enabled with their emphasis on appearances and success. The man Sarah thought she knew, the man everyone believed to be the epitome of an eligible bachelor, was revealed to be a practiced deceiver, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and shattered trust. The beautiful wedding venue, now empty, save for their anguished group, felt less like a place of celebration and more like a crime scene bearing witness to the murder of a future that had never truly existed. The world outside the ballroom faded into irrelevance as Sarah's personal catastrophe consumed her. She sat in a quiet corner of the grand suite her family had booked, the pristine white of her wedding dress now feeling like a mocking shroud. Her mother, Eleanor, hovered nearby, offering silent comfort, while her father, Robert, had gone to speak with Michael's parents, though Sarah barely registered their absence. Her mind was a chaotic storm, battling between the depth of her love for Michael and the crushing weight of his profound betrayal. Every memory, every tender moment they had shared was now tainted by the revelation. Was his affection genuine or merely a performance? Had she been a naive fool, blind to the true nature of the man she had so readily given her heart to? The humiliation of the public spectacle, the whispers she knew would follow her, felt almost as unbearable as the private anguish. She envisioned the headlines, the gossip, the pitying glances, and a wave of nausea swept over her. A small, quiet knock at the door signaled the arrival of her older sister Emily and her best friend Chloe, both looking distraught but determined. They had been trying to reach her worried sick after the abrupt end to the ceremony. Emily, ever the pragmatist, sat beside her, gently taking her hand. "Sarah, you don't have to say anything right now. Just breathe." Chloe, more emotional, simply hugged her tightly. As the initial shock began to recede, a torrent of questions flooded Sarah's mind. Could she ever forgive Michael? Was there a path to mend a trust so utterly shattered? The idea of a life without him, a future that she had meticulously planned with him at its center, felt desolate and terrifying. But the thought of staying with him, of enduring the constant doubt and the visible reminder of his infidelity, Jessica and their child, was equally horrifying. How could she look at him without seeing the lies? How could she build a family with a man who already had another one? Emily, sensing her internal turmoil, spoke softly. "This isn't just about forgiveness, Sarah. It's about respect. Your respect for yourself. What kind of life do you want? Do you want to live with this shadow hanging over you? Or do you want to start fresh, even if it's terrifying?" Chloe nodded, adding, "He made his choices. Now you get to make yours. You don't owe him anything, least of all your happiness." Their words, though painful, began to pierce through the fog of her despair. The decision was hers, an agonizing choice between attempting to salvage a broken dream or finding the courage to forge an entirely new path alone. The weight of that choice in the midst of such profound emotional wreckage was almost unbearable. The quiet solace of the suite couldn't last forever. As dawn broke, painting the sky with colors that mocked Sarah's internal desolation, Her father Robert entered with a grim expression. "Michael is here, Sarah. He insists on speaking with you alone?" A tremor ran through her, a mixture of dread and a fierce need for answers. She knew this confrontation was inevitable. She had to look him in the eye, not just to hear his excuses, but to demand the unvarnished truth she desperately needed to begin healing. She met him in a secluded sitting area of the hotel, far from the lingering specter of the ballroom. Michael looked utterly broken. His expensive suit rumpled his face, etched with sleeplessness and despair. He rose as she entered his gaze, pleading, "Sarah, please, let me explain. I am so sorry." Sarah held up a hand, silencing him. Her voice, though soft, was laced with an unwavering steel he hadn't heard before. "No, Michael. No more explanations, no more excuses. I want the truth, every ugly detail. I want to know why you chose to lie to me, to Jessica, to both our families. I want to know what kind of man you truly are, the one who could orchestrate such a cruel deception." She stared at him, her eyes searching his for any flicker of genuine remorse beyond his current self-pity. "Did you ever truly love me, Michael? Or was I just a convenient part of the life your parents mapped out for you?" He flinched at her directness, his carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the weight of her piercing questions. "Of course I loved you, Sarah. I still do," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. He recounted a tangled tale of pressure from his family, fear of disappointing his powerful father, and a weak inability to break off either relationship. He confessed to the comfort he found in Jessica, a fleeting escape from his constrained existence while still believing Sarah was his destined future. It was a pathetic admission of weakness, a stark contrast to the strong, confident man she had fallen in love with. As Michael stumbled through his painful confession, the consequences of his actions were already rippling far beyond their personal tragedy. News of the public scandal had spread like wildfire, a juicy morsel for the society columns and business tabloids. Mr. Harrison had spent the night in damage control, fielding frantic calls from board members and investors. Business deals that had been on the cusp of finalization were now on hold, their long-standing family name suddenly tarnished by their son's shocking lack of integrity. Mrs. Harrison was distraught not only by her son's behavior, but by the public humiliation and the potential professional fallout for her husband. Michael, for the first time in his life, was truly facing the repercussions of his irresponsible choices, not just in his personal life, but in the very foundation of his family's legacy. Sarah watched him not with pity, but with a cold realization that this man so tangled in his own web of deceit was far from the person she thought she knew. The confrontation left Sarah emotionally drained, yet oddly resolute. Michael's desperate pleas and hollow explanations offered no real comfort, only confirmed the depth of his self-deception and fundamental weakness. The initial raw grief for her lost dream began to give way to a cold, hard anger and a growing sense of self-preservation. She knew she couldn't simply move past this. The very foundation of her trust had been obliterated. The question was no longer if she would confront him, but what she would do next. Days bled into a week, each one a relentless exercise in navigating the fallout. Sarah stayed with her parents, cocooned by their support, while the scandal raged in the background, a relentless hum of public speculation. Michael made repeated attempts to reach her with phone calls, texts, and even flowers, each effort feeling more like an imposition than a genuine plea. His parents, still reeling from the professional repercussions, also tried to intervene, urging Sarah to reconsider, to think about the families. Their pleas, however, felt less about Sarah's well-being and more about damage control for their own reputation. During this time, Sarah found solace in long conversations with Emily and Chloe. They listened patiently, offering unwavering support, but also gently pushing her to consider her own future. "You deserve more than a life of constant doubt, Sarah," Emily asserted one evening, pouring them all tea. "Can you truly ever look at him as his child and not feel this pain?" Chloe added, "This isn't about blaming you or even forgiving him right now. It's about figuring out if you can be happy, genuinely happy with him after this." Sarah grappled with the agonizing choice. Part of her, the part that remembered their deepest connections and the dreams they had shared, wanted to believe in a path to reconciliation. She considered therapy individual and couples, the idea of a long, arduous process of rebuilding trust from the ground up. But another stronger part of her recoiled from the sheer magnitude of the task. The thought of constantly wondering, of knowing that Michael had lived such a profound lie, filled her with an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. And then there was Jessica and the baby, an undeniable lifelong link to his betrayal. How could she ever truly move on if that reminder was always present? She began to understand that healing might not mean returning to what was, but rather finding strength in separation. It was a terrifying prospect, dismantling a future she had meticulously planned, facing the world as a woman whose wedding had ended in scandal. But it was also liberating. The slow, painful realization dawned on her true healing might only begin when she prioritized her own peace, even if that meant walking away from the man she had once loved so deeply and forging a new, independent beginning. The decision weighed heavily on her, but for the first time since the wedding day, Sarah felt a faint flicker of agency, a tiny spark of hope that her life could and would move forward. The decision, though agonizing, brought a strange sense of clarity to Sarah. She knew what she had to do for herself. The question of forgiveness for Michael, however, remained a complex and deeply personal journey, one that she understood might not lead to reconciliation, but rather to her own internal peace. She communicated her choice to Michael through her father, requesting space and time, making it clear that their engagement was over. Michael, left with no other option, reluctantly retreated, though his desperate messages continued to trickle in. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into a month. The initial media frenzy surrounding the wedding day shocker slowly subsided, replaced by new scandals. Sarah began to pick up the pieces of her life, leaning heavily on her family and friends. She started seeing a therapist not to fix herself, but to process the trauma and rebuild her trust in her own judgment. The journey was slow, punctuated by moments of anger, sadness, and profound grief for the future that had been stolen. During this time, Michael, stripped of his comfortable life and facing the tangible repercussions of his actions, began his own painful process of self-reckoning. His father, in a rare moment of stark honesty, made it clear that Michael's irresponsible behavior had not only damaged the family name, but had put significant business interests at risk. He was forced to confront his own patterns of entitlement and deceit, patterns that had been implicitly tolerated, if not outright enabled by his upbringing. He began attending therapy genuinely for the first time in his life, starting to peel back the layers of a personality accustomed to avoidance and manipulation. He also had to face his responsibilities towards Jessica and their unborn child, a reality he could no longer escape or defer. His conversations with Jessica were strained, revolving around practicalities, but even there, a sliver of genuine, albeit forced responsibility began to emerge. Sarah, though, maintaining her distance, heard snippets of his struggles from mutual acquaintances. She learned he was no longer the arrogant, self-assured man she once knew. There were rumors he had stepped back from some family business responsibilities, that he was genuinely trying to make amends with Jessica in a more substantial way than just financial support. This knowledge didn't immediately lead to forgiveness in the sense of excusing his actions, but it allowed a faint shift in her perspective. She began to understand that his actions stemmed from a deep-seated weakness and immaturity, rather than pure malice. Redemption, she realized, was not something Michael could simply ask for, nor was it hers to grant in the traditional sense of rekindling their romance. It was a long, arduous process he had to undertake for himself, a profound change in character that would require years of consistent effort. Forgiveness for Sarah was slowly transforming into a release from the consuming bitterness and anger, a decision to no longer allow his betrayal to define her or dictate her future. It was a quiet, internal act of setting herself free, paving the way for her own healing, independent of whether Michael ever truly found his own path to genuine redemption. The scars would remain, but the open wound was finally beginning to close. Months turned into a year, then two. The raw ache in Sarah's heart had transformed into a dull, persistent throb, a scar that remained but no longer dictated her every breath. She had moved out of her parents' house, finding a charming apartment in a new neighborhood, a deliberate step towards building a life entirely her own. She poured her energy into her career, discovering a passion she hadn't fully realized before, and reconnected with friends, forming deeper bonds forged in the crucible of her past pain. The public scandal eventually faded from the headlines, relegated to a footnote in the ever-churning cycle of gossip, leaving Sarah with a newfound quiet anonymity that she cherished. Michael, too, had undergone a significant, albeit arduous, transformation. The initial public humiliation and the tangible threat to his family's business had served as a brutal wake-up call. He had truly committed to therapy, confronting the deep-seated issues that had fueled his deceit. He stepped back from some of his more public responsibilities within the family company, focusing instead on internal projects and, more importantly, on building a genuine, if still tentative, relationship with Jessica and their child. Jessica, initially wary and resentful, slowly began to allow a guarded co-parenting relationship to develop, recognizing Michael's genuine efforts to be present and responsible. He was no longer the entitled, charming rogue, but a man humbled by his mistakes, learning to navigate the complexities of fatherhood and accountability. Sarah and Michael occasionally crossed paths at large social events, always exchanging polite but distant nods. The intense emotions of their past had dulled, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of shared history and separate futures. There was no grand reunion, no dramatic reconciliation, but rather a mature understanding of the irreparable break that had occurred. Forgiveness for Sarah had not meant forgetting, nor did it mean rebuilding a shattered relationship. It meant releasing herself from the burden of anger and resentment, allowing her to move forward with grace and a quiet strength. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah found herself at a local coffee shop. As she waited for her order, she noticed a man enter with a young child on his shoulders. The man's laugh, deep and genuine, caught her attention. It was Michael, and perched on his shoulders was a lively toddler with wide, curious eyes, his son. Michael hadn't seen her. He was completely absorbed in the moment, a doting father, a stark contrast to the emotionally stunted man she had almost married. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Sarah's lips. There was no lingering pain, no bitterness, just a quiet sense of peace. She saw a man who was perhaps finally becoming the person he was meant to be, albeit on a different path with a different family. Her own journey, though painful, had led her to a place of newfound independence and self-discovery. Her life was no longer defined by a broken promise, but by the quiet strength she had found within herself, ready for whatever new beginnings lay ahead. A wedding day shocker. The Pregnant Mistress offers more than just a dramatic narrative. It delivers several profound messages and explores core human values relevant to every audience member. At its heart, the story is a powerful exploration of honesty and integrity. Michael's deceit highlights the devastating consequences of dishonesty, not just for the betrayed, but for the betrayer as well. It underscores that lies, no matter how elaborate or well-intentioned, inevitably unravel, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. For the audience, it's a stark reminder of the importance of truthfulness in all relationships and the high cost of sacrificing integrity for personal gain or convenience. The narrative also delves deeply into betrayal and its aftermath. Sarah's journey is a testament to human resilience in the face of profound heartbreak. It shows that while betrayal can shatter your world, it does not have to define your future. The story emphasizes that healing is a process often painful and messy, but ultimately possible. For viewers, it offers a sense of solidarity and hope, illustrating that even from the depths of despair, one can find the strength to rebuild and move forward. Furthermore, the story touches upon the complexities of forgiveness and self-worth. Sarah's eventual decision to release herself from the burden of anger is a powerful lesson in self-preservation. It shows that forgiveness isn't always about condoning the wrongdoer's actions or reconciling with them. Sometimes it's a critical step in reclaiming your own peace and prioritizing your mental and emotional well-being. It encourages the audience to reflect on their own capacity for forgiveness, both for others and for themselves, and to recognize that their worth is not tied to someone else's actions. Finally, A Wedding Day Shocker subtly examines the societal pressures and expectations that can contribute to such complex situations. Michael's character, influenced by his family's status and expectations, hints at how external pressures can lead individuals to make disastrous choices. This encourages the audience to look beyond surface appearances and consider the deeper motivations and societal dynamics at play. Ultimately, The story leaves the audience with a resonant message. While life can throw unexpected and painful curveballs, the power to heal, grow, and forge a new beginning always lies within oneself. It's a story about choosing strength over despair, truth over deceit, and ultimately self-love over sustained heartbreak.